irgendwo rum, aber ich weiß auch nicht so richtig.
Okay, so Fabian and I wanted to exchange some thoughts about a proposal for a potential new team that we've been kind of contemplating for a while now. And I'm going to share my screen quickly because there's an issue we can look at together. Let me do that quickly. I should be able to see my web browser now.
Yep.
So the idea where this all came from was a need that I saw, and I think other people saw too, that some of our core libraries and frameworks that we use at GitLab do not clearly fall into the responsibility of any existing team. So I just wanted to throw the idea out there. Would it make sense to spin up a new team? The name is completely in the air. I started with calling it platform team, which then turned out we already have the SaaS platform team, so that might be confusing. So maybe that's not what it should be called. Then we use core team, but we also already have a core team, which is the core community that contributes to GitLab and who are not employed by GitLab Inc. So I'm just going to call it platform team because that's what we started with, even if that is not the best name. We're at the stage now where we have kind of identified a rough vision or even identified projects that this team could take on, but we're still trying to figure out two main things. First of all, is there actually a team at GitLab already which might be able to take this on? And we've talked to a variety of group or section leads here, including engineering productivity, Rachel from infrastructure as well, because we have the frameworks team, for instance. So one idea was, well, maybe does it overlap too much with this? Then of course the team I'm on, application performance, and maybe others I might be unaware of, to be honest. So we came to the conclusion so far that none of these existing teams or sections would be appropriate for this particular area that I propose should be covered by the team. So we're kind of back at a point now where we're thinking, okay, it's most likely if we want to do this, it should be a new team, which then raises, of course, all of these questions around how do we measure impact of this team? Like what are the stated goals, and how do we measure success for a team like this? And yeah, I also had a chat with Rachel and Liam already about this, and they posted some thoughts already in the issue down here somewhere. I think here. Yeah, I don't know. Like you can look at that as well. But basically, we're at a point now where we're just trying to collect ideas. So I was hoping to brainstorm a bit about if we had a team that kind of looks. Which would not be an infrastructure team, but which would be sitting probably in enablement even, definitely in the product group. So be more like a development-oriented team where the audience is other developers, both inside and outside of GitLab, the company. How do we define things like group KPIs? Because it's very difficult. Just to take one example to illustrate why I have a hard time thinking of a solution here. Like if this team takes on owning Ruby as a platform that other developers build software on for GitLab, and we know this can cause a lot of work, right? We're currently working on the Ruby 3 upgrade, which has been ongoing for a year and a half. So these are not small projects. They need to, and we also gravely underestimated the effort that went into this. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on how could we define success here or impact on the target audience, which would be, I think, other developers. Same thing for Ruby on Rails, but also things like I mentioned. Potential area could be all these cross-cutting shared libraries that we use that really enable a whole area of use cases, right? I mean, we have all these feature verticals that are aligned with the DevOps stages, but pretty much all of them, or almost all of them, do things like networking, sending HTTP requests or serializing data in some way, shape, or form, whether that be JSON or XML. They need to track errors into Sentry, right? Like these are all of these kind of building blocks. And a lot of this is like software or software wrappers that we write that are then used by everyone else inside and outside of GitLab to build features on top. And all of these things are currently, at best, I would say, owned by volunteers or on a very kind of ad hoc basis, which makes planning almost impossible, right? So often things like contributions to our core libraries, they come from someone needs something, and then there will be a merge request, but that is not really like a clear vision behind where this should be going, or is this consistent with how other developers use this at GitLab? But then also, upgrades to Ruby and Rails. There's a lot more than just fixing the red squiggly lines that appear if you update the software and then something breaks. Because they bring in new features as well, where I think we need some guidance as well for other people. What should we use? What could we use? Like what could be an opportunity as well, right? If Rails has a new really powerful feature, should we be using this? Like how do we adopt this at GitLab? And I don't think we should leave this up to kind of the to let every single feature team decide, because that leads to these really big inconsistencies. So this is kind of like, long story short, like what I think needs a proper owner at GitLab, and that would be kind of the area in which this team would like operate. But I'm a bit stumped on the question on how do we measure impact for this? So I don't know. Yeah, that's the question I wanted to throw out there and see if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so just so that I understand, thank you for the additional context. I think if I look at this, I think the problem that you're trying to address is that GitLab as a product is built on a number of software libraries and frameworks. Let's call it the stack, right? Mm-hmm. Or several stacks, maybe. We have maybe one for Go and one for Ruby, broadly speaking, but there are stacks. And every engineering team, also, infrastructure engineering, for example, relies on this stack to do their work. And the problem is that if you just assume that's, static, you run into version incompatibilities, you can't keep up with upgrades, with new features, and some things may also be harder than they need to be because they're not very well integrated into the stack. So in a way, the outcome that having a well-defined set of libraries or a well-defined stack is that there's sort of a golden path for developers when they want to do certain things. It's like, you want to interact with object storage, you use this, right? You want to, I don't know, log something, this is how you do it, right? Sidekick works in that specific way. And there's a lot of things associated with those libraries and frameworks that need to happen, like upgrading Ruby, right? That they are big things. No individual team working on sort of feature verticals is really incentivized to own this, because
exactly, yes, that's the key problem. Yeah,
that's the key problem, right? They just want to use it, but they don't want to spend resources upgrading all of their Ruby stuff manually, which that doesn't really produce value for them. Is that sort of a fair summary?
That's the perfect summary. And actually, like you mentioned object storage, that's a really good example, which actually we ended up, this was a really a big area that kind of sits underneath a lot of features that we built on top. And this piece of infrastructure, the way how we integrate with object storage, was not owned by anyone. There was a working group where we tried to improve on the situation, at least like lay out a path forward. Of course, we couldn't fix everything, right? But one successful outcome of that working group was that object storage found an owner in the frameworks team, which is part of infrastructure. And I think in this example, it makes sense maybe to move that closer to infrastructure, because it relies a lot on the actual integration with cloud storage providers. There's of course also a development portion to it that the developers interface with. So maybe this is actually not quite such a clear-cut example, but it's still one of these examples where there was, like you mentioned, there was no individual feature team that would in any way be incentivized to maintain all of this code and the integrations behind it, but they constantly needed to rely on it. So this led then to a lot of like, these features or this underlying technology, it just kind of deteriorates over time, right? And another good example is things like JSON, or things like we had a good example with HTTP clients. So a team shouldn't have to think about, how do I make a network request to an external service? This is stuff I should just expect exists and works well, right? And it should be consistent across all of these features. And we had a case where what happened was that one group needed a feature that our internal HTTP library that we actually recommend. We even have a linter that flags if you don't use it. So if you don't use this library, if they wanted to use this library, but it didn't support the particular feature they needed. So they ended up, instead of expanding on the feature set, because we have no team that does that, they decided, well, we use a different library, which is I totally understand this. This is a totally sensible answer, because they don't want to implement HTTP libraries, right? That's not their job. Like their job is to build the feature they were supposed to build, which just happened to need this one feature in our HTTP stack. So this is also another example where a team actually owning these concerns would have helped, right? Because the feature team can then go to that platform team, whatever we're going to call it, and say, hey, look, we need to do this and that, but this library doesn't support that. Well, let's file an issue and put that on the board of this team, and then we'll actually improve this for everyone. Because then it's not also this one team that will benefit from it. It will benefit everyone in the future as well going forward.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. And sort of on the surface, I see this is a big problem area, and I think it has. I think if I'm looking at sort of the negative implications of this, right? If we don't get this under control, we just accumulate tech debt. We fall out of, like we end up using very old versions of things, and you run into a whole host of issues. But ultimately, I think the biggest impact here is maybe sort of the negative impact on developer productivity, and that may also be. I mean, there is, I think, a engineering productivity team, so I think this is maybe not too dissimilar, but ultimately, I think there are two things that I could see being relevant here, which is sort of the productivity of engineers as it pertains to these things, like what's the percentage of sort of homegrown things where people do stuff that doesn't align with the golden path, right? The things that we support and care. And ideally that's very low. I don't know how to measure that, but I think that may be one of the things that you want to look at, is like the adoption of the software libraries and frameworks that you put out. And in some cases, you don't really have a choice, because we run a monolith. But so I think we have less sort of sprawl than in other cases, but maybe that is something where, there are different versions of things in use, by different parts of the product. And that's maybe something we can look at. I don't know. And I think the other thing is really also about sort of engineering happiness, because I think I still remember this at a previous company that I worked with. We hired an engineer from Google, and we were a startup, right? And everything was a bit chaotic. And that person said, I've never seen a place like Google where it was so easy to work with code and make things happen. And I think this is the place where you want to be, where for GitLab engineers, they should not have to think about any of this. They should get on with their development and crank out whatever is valuable to them in their space. But as soon as they have to start thinking about, I don't know, data serialization issues, I think you've kind of lost. And I don't really know how to measure that. I think there is maybe something that we could that you could do quantitatively and maybe qualitatively in terms of lead time, right? But also in terms of just asking people more frequently, like how they get on.
I was actually thinking that. I think the quantitative part is the one that really confuses me, because I agree with everything you said, and the Google example is a really good one, because they've been focused for a long time on having these internal teams whose audience are also other internal Google teams, right? So this, like, to create this environment of developer self-service, right? So you want to get something done, well, here's everything you need, right? And you basically don't have to think about it anymore. That's kind of that would for me be the North Star, maybe, right? But then things like developer happiness, and it's like super hard.
It's hard, and I can't say like, look, I have a solution now, right? But
yeah, so maybe something actually like interviews or something, could that work? Like, not interviews, sorry.
Yeah,
questionnaire every quarter or so, and
I think that's a thing. I think ultimately maybe this is also something that, like, broader, that I'll have to figure out eventually, because these principles, I think this is maybe something that I'm thinking about. It's like, it's to a certain extent, it's sort of platforms all the way down, where ideally you have strong minimal platforms for a lot of those activities, right? You said, well, we have here sort of the Ruby stack that you need to maintain, but there are other things, for example, with error budgets and like metrics that maybe the delivery and scalability teams care about, that also go in that direction. So I think we may want to think about the framework where, how do we actually assess teams that indirectly contribute to, let's say, monthly active users for GitLab, like, and adoption of features. And I think some of those things are similar, right? Where we can, if we provide frameworks, we can actually look at how many people have adopted those, right? And look at those things similarly. But ultimately, I think there's a level of indirection where, if we do this well, we may see increases in overall velocity, and but that's hard to discern, the effects that we have.
What the driver is.
I have no. Yeah. What does it drive, right? And
I think the adoption thing could work well for something like this, because there's very specific things we can look at. Coming back to my example with the HTTP client, we currently have, I think, 4 different ones in our code base, which makes no sense, right? We only need one. So maybe one this could actually be, but you would have to tie this to very specific things, right? But you could say, because the wider a good HTTP client or HTTP stack is adopted throughout the code base that would be developed by this team, the less need is there for alternative clients, right? So they should go down. So that's actually a number you can track.
Yes. I mean, maybe we can, like, you can think about simple things where, you state the Ruby platform, the Ruby on Rails platforms, like, how many minor and major versions are we behind upstream?
Exactly. I just wanted to say that. I was about to say, I'm jumping a bit around, because that is a different way of looking at things, but a time frame is actually super important for the first 4 year, for instance.
Yes.
Because the longer we wait, especially when there's a major release, and that is true for Rails and Ruby, 3 big things that we use everywhere, where there is already a new major version out, or in the case of Ruby, we're actually, I think, 2 versions behind, where we could even have a dashboard, right, where we could see how many days or months are we behind the latest version, and then that could be an SLI/SLO even, right? So if you cross a certain threshold, something should blink red.
Yes, the like red buzzer on Matthias's desk goes off. And I mean, especially with some things, I mean, I'm not super deeply familiar with, let's say, Sidekick features and how they impact GitLab, but with Ruby on Rails, major Ruby on Rails upgrade versions, I think, may have a pretty significant impact on the types of features that we can develop. If you think about things like Action Cable, right?
Exactly.
For example, right? And so that's a way of looking at it. So those are some ideas that
Mm.
come up. I'm quite supportive of this, and I think it's the right way of thinking about it. I also strongly dislike not having ownership across these things, because it sort of ends up in a mad scramble every once in a while when somebody realizes we really need to do something. So yeah.
Do you think because the KPI question, or how to measure success, I think is really important, right? So because I think the suggestion was, if it sounds like most people are at least not against the proposal, and it also sounds like from the feedback I've gotten so far that it does not squarely fit in an existing team.
Yes.
So I would probably go ahead and say, let's just do the next step here. Is that then to go to the internal handbook and kind of formalize it there?
Yes, I think that's a good idea. I have to drop because I have another call now.
Of course. This was great. This was helpful.
I'm glad. Yeah, and I'll be happy to be in the loop on this. And thanks for thinking about it. I think this is going to make life better for everyone.
I hope so. Yeah. Thanks, Fabian.
All right. Bye, Matthias.
Bye.